Welcome back. Let's talk about some historical airbursts and impacts. Some that have happened in recent memory, and some a little bit in the past. But geologically, I guess, all pretty recent. So in 1908, there was a very famous airburst that happened kind of way out in the middle of northern Russia, Siberia, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And it was called the Tunguska event. Now, this is the this this has been the discussion of conspiracy theories and alien theories and all this other stuff. What it was an airburst. So some space debris is coming through the atmosphere, burned and blew up into the atmosphere. When it did, it created a shock wave that hit the ground and raced out in all directions, flattening trees for miles, just poof, straight down like this. And this is some images from that event. Again, it kind of happened out in Siberia, so not many people, if any, really saw the activity, the event. I believe a few did. More on that in just a minute here. But, because it was out in the middle of nowhere, a lot of stories started to develop, like, oh my gosh, like, what is this, aliens? Is it some secret government thing? No, it was some space stuff. It just blew up in the atmosphere. So this is what a recreation of what they think happened. So kind of burning up through the atmosphere, blew up in the atmosphere, so it airburst. And although the object never hit the ground itself, the shock wave kind of raced out. So this blue line kind of indicates the shock wave. And when it hit the ground, the shock wave hit the ground and then went out in all directions. Leveling trees over 800 square miles. So you can see why this might be a really weird event. And the explosion would be very loud as well. So people may be thinking, bomb. 1908, this is before we had nuclear bombs, so they weren't necessarily thinking on that scale. So a very large event, very weird. So every once in a while, this is talked of in conspiracy theories. And in fact, it's briefly mentioned in Ghostbusters. See if you can find it. You know what? Extra credit if you can find the scene in Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters 1. Briefly mentioned Tunguska event. So what happened? An asteroid, about 120 meters in diameter, burst in the atmosphere, a little over 5 miles above the surface. So this explosion was actually 1,000 times more powerful than a Hiroshima atomic bomb. And even, the first atomic bombs weren't dropped until the 1940s. So this was almost 40 years before that. So we weren't even thinking about explosions on that level. So something this big occurring is just mind-blowing at the time. So it flattened 80 million trees, over 800 square miles of forest. A lot of stuff. It was the largest witnessed airburst to date. There was 3 reported deaths, but not necessarily confirmed it was from the airburst itself, the shockwave. There was 3 people died, but they weren't quite sure, if it was specifically because of the event itself. The shockwave from the airburst would have measured a 5.0 on the Richter magnitude scale, so decent amount of energy released. An explosion of this magnitude, were it over a city, would destroy a large metropolitan area. If this same event happened over 5 miles above Phoenix, flattened, just flattened. But thankfully, at the time, happened out in the middle of nowhere, Siberia, Russia. There was another airburst, actually more recently, also in Russia, over the area of Chelyabinsk in 2013. So another airburst. So some material came in at quite a shallow angle and blew up right around here. You can see some of the material continuing on, but it did blow up. A rather large airburst. Sent a shockwave, not as comparable to the Tunguska event. So this happened overpopulated areas in Russia. In fact, in Russia, due to rampant insurance fraud, a lot of cars have dash cams, cameras right on the dashboard facing out, so to catch anybody trying to purposely cause an accident. It's a thing in Russia. So there's a lot of footage of this airburst from a lot of these dashboard cameras. So it's just kind of an artist recreation of what it might have looked like there. There's a little video, and we'll watch that in class. But again, the asteroid much smaller, only 20 meters in diameter, so about a sixth of the size of the one that happened about 100 years prior in Tunguska. And then the airburst was actually even higher in the atmosphere, so smaller asteroid, 5 times higher in the atmosphere. So that means it's going to be less powerful. The amount of energy was released was equated to about 33 times more powerful than the Hiroshima atomic bomb. But since it was just so high in the atmosphere, it didn't really do much. There was a number of injuries and some cost to buildings. There's over 1,500 injuries. A lot of them were due to windows that got blown out from the shockwave. This still is a rather large explosion, 33 times bigger than the Hiroshima atomic bomb, which was actually small on nuclear weapon scale, but still big nonetheless. So once that shockwave did hit the ground, it rattled a lot of windows, shook a lot of doors, broke a lot of glass. A lot of those injuries were kind of from flying glass from the shockwave. Over 7,000 buildings in 6 cities across the region were damaged by the shockwave itself, and it was the largest known natural object to have entered Earth's atmosphere since the 1908 Tunguska event. So those are all airbursts. And again, if there was some space material to do some destruction on Earth, chances are it would be another airburst. But every once in a while we get impacts, and a lot of those are on the more smaller scale. For instance, in 1938, a meteorite went through a garage and through an old Model, is that a Model T, Model A Ford, something like that. So right through the seat and hitting the muffler. So this is from that vehicle. It's very rare that people get hit with space debris. It did happen in 1954 in Alabama, of all places. There was a meteorite crashing through a home, hit this lady right on the hip. That's a good little bruise right there. 1992, an impact again went through a garage and hit a car right on the taillight, and then they started to just show that car at different spots. It was like a tourist attraction. I don't know, kind of cool. I'd go see it probably. 2003, New Orleans came through a roof, bounced off a bed, destroyed the a little desk that was sitting right next to it. I don't think anyone was in the bed or at the time, so no one injured there. But these small pieces of debris, meteorites, and they could be, baseball size. And again, they're moving 45,000 miles an hour, so they're going to crash right through whatever they come in contact with. But thankfully, again, very rarely do they hit people, and very rarely do they directly kill people. Probably one of the more famous impact sites is the Barringer meteorite crater right here in Arizona. I believe there may be a group presenting on this later in the semester, so I'll save any information for that. Depending on when you're viewing this video, if for some reason there's not, I might elaborate a little bit more in class. So very famous impact. So more details from the group that may be presenting. But so this is actually the Barringer meteorite crater, known as Meteor Crater for all the wrong reasons. It's actually the best preserved impact site on Earth. Happened relatively geologically recent in a very dry area where weathering and erosion is not common. Therefore, it's pretty well preserved. However, it's actually on the small scale from larger impact events. The largest one in the U.S. happened in the Chesapeake Bay, just off the coast of Virginia. So you can see the impact crater is actually 56 miles wide, which is pretty darn big. This was an impact that occurred 35.5 million years ago. Again, 56, 53 miles wide, somewhere in there, and almost a mile deep. as a big hole in the ground. That happened due to an iron asteroid, which was thought to have been just under 2 miles wide in diameter. That's a big asteroid. So we're talking, when that hit 30 some odd million years ago, we're talking major earth-changing event. So it's the largest U.S. impact crater, and it wasn't even discovered until the 1980s and 1990s, and that's due to oil drilling, because the crater itself is on the coast underneath the water. So it wasn't until some layers. So with oil drilling, you drill down into the ground and you pull up the drill, and it has what's called a core sample. So your drill is this hollow tube, and you kind of drill it into the ground, and then you pull out this hollow tube, and as you pull it out, it has soil, sediment, rock layers in there. You look at it and you analyze it to see if there's any oil-bearing layers in there. So what they found in these core samples, as they're looking for oil, was a layer that contained those glass tektites, as well as shocked quartz, which is metamorphosed quartz mineral, and that's due to an impact event. So the mineral itself changed a little bit. And so these are unmistakable signs of an impact. So they found this stuff in a particular layer of these cores as they're drilling it out. And they're drilling all these cores to find oil, and they keep finding this stuff. And that helped them figure out about, how, oh man, it's this big. Oh no, it's this big. Oh man, we're finding this stuff wider and wider and wider. So that's where it came up to 50 plus miles in diameter. So the surrounding region suffered massive devastation. There was probably a mega tsunami occurred, and we're probably talking earth-altering impact. Today in the area, even 35 million years into the future, it's still an issue. The impact that occurred 35 million years ago is still an issue because it's causing a type of hazard called land subsidence. It's messing with the flow of groundwater, and then earthquakes are an issue in the area, all attributed to this event. Why? Well, let's look at a cross section. So if we slice that crater in half and then look at it from the side, now we're looking at the layers of the earth going down into the earth. Because of that impact, you have this big crater kind of filled in with a lot of breccia, which is broken up, angled pieces of rock, now becoming a sedimentary rock. So a little bit unstable, which causes the layers above it to kind of move and fault and break, so creating faults. And remember that movement of plates relative to one another, that's the definition of an earthquake. That's at faults are where earthquakes happen. It's not where there's just breakage of a plate, but breakage and movement. And that movement is essentially what the earthquake is. So because of this unstable material and faults along the edge of the crater rim itself, it's causing faults on the layers of rock and sediment above, which, as this material moves, causes earthquakes. Crazy to think about. And because the different layers are kind of shifting about, that's altering how the groundwater flows through this area as well. So there's groundwater issues in the area. 30 plus million years later, that impact is still having an impact. You see what I did there? Yeah, that's pretty bad. So let's pause here, because when we come back, we're going to talk about one more very famous impact, and that's the impact that happened just off the Yucatan Peninsula near the area of Chicxulub, Mexico. So we'll pause here, and I'll see you back here in just a second.